So, hi guys, welcome to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about Yakuza games. So it's no secret that these are some of my favourite games ever. So I thought I would just do a little video talking about which is my favourite and ranking them from 1 to 6. Just as a disclaimer before I start, I'm just going to be talking about the linear story games of the Yakuza series. I'm not going to be going over any of the other games like the PSP ones that go over Kiryu's ancestors because I just haven't played those, and also they're not part of the main story. We're also not going to be mentioning Dead Souls. No, sorry. So, number 6 is Yakuza IV. Now, I do really like this game. Like I said, all Yakuza games are good, and I specifically like this particular version because it's a steelbook version that took me a long time to find, and I think it's just beautiful. However, it's not my favourite game. It's a bit slow and it kind of goes off in too many tangents. And it just ends up being a bit of a slog towards the end. There is a bit of a crazy bear fight. So, although I would still play this game if you're playing through all the storylines, there was just a couple of story plots that weren't that interesting. I didn't like Saejima, who you play quite a considerable amount of time with. There were quite a few different characters that I just did not enjoy playing as. They just weren't as interesting as Kiryu. So it kind of lost me at the end. And there's also not as many mini games and side missions. So yeah, overall just not my favourite one. So number 5 on my list is Yakuza 6 Song of Life. Now I did really enjoy this game. It's a really interesting new installment of the series that carries on Kiryu's story and also finishes his story. So for that reason I still love this game. However, towards the end it becomes a huge slog and there is just too many plot lines going on, and it kind of ruined the story for me. So the story in the beginning was really interesting and really engaging, but then it kind of went off on too many tangents for me, and the end boss just took me about 4 straight hours to complete. For that reason, it's a bit further down my list. However, the mini games in it are really interesting. There's a few side stories that are just absolutely hilarious, and it's a good modern installment of the game. So, number 4 on my list is Yakuza 3. Now, I really enjoyed the story of this game. The world does feel very empty because it's the first installment that they made on the PS3. However, it is a really solid story and it made me bawl towards the ending. So despite the gameplay feeling a bit clunky, I still really love this game. I would still play it again just for the story. So, number 3 on my list is Yakuza Kawami 2. Now this is a remake of the second game. Just as a bit of a disclaimer, I've never played the original Yakuza 2 game, so I don't know how it compares, but I'm assuming it's quite a faithful remake. The reason why it's so high up my list is because the story is really solid. It does get a bit too dramatic for my liking towards the end. You fight a tiger at one point. I really like the mini games that are in this game. The hostess mini game I played hours and hours of, and there's just so much to do in this world. It feels really full. It's a real improvement on some of the previous remakes mini games, and it's got some really interesting side stories as well. So for that reason, it's number 3. So, number 2 on my list is Yakuza V. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy of it because it wasn't released physically in the West. You can only get it digitally, but thankfully now, because there's a remaster of 3, 4 and 5, you can now buy a physical PS4 copy of it that is remastered. The reason why it's so high up my list is because the mini games are just so extensive in it. You can play for hours and hours and hours and not even touch the story. You get to play as several different characters, including Haruka, who is basically your adopted daughter throughout the whole series, and you get to play little mini idol games with her as she wants to become a Japanese music idol, and it's just so interesting and so rich in its story. It does start to get a little bit repetitive towards the end with boss fighting, but I think because it's spread across so many different stories and they all tie in towards the end, it just makes it one really interesting story, and you get to see the perspective of different people around the city of Kamurocho, and so for that reason it's very high up my list. So number 1 on my list is Yakuza Kawami or Yakuza 1. Now, this is the first one that I played. I started playing the original on the PS2 and I absolutely fell in love with it. So I ended up buying the Kawami remake of it. Now, the Kawami remake just brings out all the best elements of it. It's really faithful to the original game and the original story, but also adding, obviously, new gameplay to it and different combat styles, and also you get all the amazing mini games with it and all the side quests. The mini games aren't quite as extensive as Yakuza Kawami 2, but the story in this game is so solid and so dramatic, and it made me absolutely fall in love with the series. So this will always be my number one Yakuza game, and I highly recommend anyone play this game. Just to see what you think of the Yakuza series, you need to play them all in order. You can't play them separately because they all carry on from one another. So start off with this game, it's amazing, you won't regret it. So just as a little disclaimer, you may be wondering where Yakuza 0 is on my list. Unfortunately, I decided not to include it on my list because I haven't played it. So I can't honestly give my opinion on it. I know, shocking. But apparently it is one of the best Yakuza games in the series, but I just can't comment on it because I haven't played it. However, I am really looking forward to playing it, and I suspect from what I have heard it would be number one on my list. Otherwise, I just haven't had a chance to play it. So that brings me to the end of the list. Again, all Yakuza games are good. I would highly recommend that you play at least the first one or 0 if you haven't played any of the Yakuza series. They've got great stories, really dramatic stories, but also a silly kind of Japanese humour that you see in some Japanese games with the side missions. The mini games are really interesting. You can play different arcade games. You can even use a claw machine if you want and win teddy bears. I just would really recommend them. They're really solid games, especially the remakes of the first two, and also Yakuza 0, which I haven't played. But you should definitely check them out if you haven't before.